Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Medtech, the premier podcast for the medical device and diagnostic industry. I'm your host, Omar Ford, and I'm also editor-in-chief of MDDI, an online publication owned by Informa that caters to the medtech engineer. On today's episode of Let's Talk MedTech, we're going to be talking to Dr. Martha Morrell, CMO of NeuroPace. We're discussing some of the breakthroughs the company has had in the field of treating epilepsy symptoms. We're also talking to Dr. Morrell about her journey into medtech and the difference between working in academia and working at a startup. It's an amazing conversation, and I can't wait for you to hear it. So, without further ado, let's talk medtech with NeuroPace's Dr. Martha Morrell. Well, hello and welcome to Let's Talk MedTech, the premier podcast for the medical device and diagnostic industry. Thanks for coming on to our program, Dr. Morrell.
Thank you for inviting me, Omar. It's a real pleasure.
Well, I know before we begin our discussion about NeuroPace and the data from the long-term post-approval study of the RNS system in focal epilepsy that was availed at the 2025 AAN annual meeting, I want to talk a little bit about your career. I want to really get into
Sure.
why you decided to go into healthcare and the medical device industry.
Right. Well, thank you. Yes, when I started out my education, I had no idea that I would be a doctor.
Uh,
I had a great mentor in college who steered me in this direction. And as part of that, I became fascinated with the brain. And that was neurology. And within neurology, really became very interested in epilepsy. So epilepsy, of course, is a brain disorder that is an electrical disorder.
mhm, mhm.
And it affects people of all ages. So I began my career in academia at Stanford and then at Columbia um, as um, uh, uh, as a treating physician and as someone who developed comprehensive epilepsy programs. And in those programs, we often see patients who have not responded to anti-seizure medications, which is about a third of people with epilepsy. For those individuals, we look for alternatives. And earlier in my career, that alternative was to resect the seizure focus. But for many people, that was not an option, or that is not an option because either it's difficult to identify the seizure focus or because it is unsafe to remove it. And for those people, we would be in a situation where I would have to sit with somebody and say, "There's nothing we can do, and I'm sorry," and that is a horrid, horrid feeling.
Mm.
So in 1997, I met our founding CEO who came from cardiac devices and development of sophisticated cardiac devices. And his question was whether some of the principles of cardiac defibrillation or pacing could be relevant to an electrical disorder of the brain. It was the most interesting and life-changing conversation. Lots of concerns about how it might not work, lots of excitement about if it could.
Mhm.
And so I became involved as steering the scientific advisory group very early on. And the engineers, the amazing engineers who all came from cardiac devices,
Mhm, mhm.
at St. Jude specifically, came over and built this amazing technology. And the first patient was treated in 2004, which is when I left full-time academic neurology to become chief medical officer. I have had the opportunity to continue to be a real doctor. And
Mhm.
so I have a faculty appointment at Stanford. I see patients, a lot of patients every week, but spend most of my time with this therapy. It's been really incredible to be able to be involved in developing a treatment that I can then use in my own patients and then come back and say, let's continue to refine the user needs, the needs of my patients and my needs, because I am a customer as well as a developer. I will mention also
Mhm,
that
mhm.
making this transition has been an experience to work with people who think differently than I do, and that is the engineers.
Yes.
And the joy
Mhm,
of this multidisciplinary effort,
mhm, mhm,
and the RNS system would not exist without this tight group of people who came um, to this mission of of improving the lives of people with intractable epilepsy. If we did not come to this intense mission with different skill sets and
mhm.
different perspectives and experiences.
How was that switching over from academia to a medical device company or a med tech company? I mean, it's got to be a little, I don't want to say jarring, but just a little different, you know? You're on both sides in a sense. You're helping patients, but you're also designing the device to help patients. So you have that inside look. But how was that coming over to NeuroPace? Yeah.
It was a very big change, and it was one that my academic medicine colleagues told me I was crazy to do. But my thought was that I could spend the rest of my career helping patients and training physicians, and that would be really, really good. But if we could figure out how to make something like this work, the impact would be so great. Um, but it's different. So when I'm at Stanford, I'm Dr. Morrell and have a lot of status. And then I go to NeuroPace and I'm Marty, and it's
Marty.
really, I know I'm not treated the same way.
I
But,
understand. Two different
also,
worlds. Yeah.
yeah, with a startup too, and
Mhm.
I have not had an experience in big companies, but with a startup, and I think many of your audience has this
Yes.
experience. There's no job description as far as I can tell. You kind of do whatever needs to be done at that moment in time. And there's good things about that, and there's tough things about it. But certainly we can move very fast. And you have to move fast when you're spending other people's money. So it's in many ways kind of the same as being a physician on the ground in the trenches, in that you do have to move fast. Time is not an option.
Let's dive in now and talk a little bit about the RNS system.
Mhm.
Give a little bit more background on it. You talked about it earlier, but when was it approved and ultimately, can you talk about the market that it serves?
No, absolutely. So this is unique, and really, it was so novel and groundbreaking that people told us that we were crazy. And now, of course, everybody thinks it was their idea
Yeah, yeah.
because it works so well. But the thought was, since we're dealing with an electrical disorder and people have seizures only a very small percentage of the time, that it would be terrific to figure out where the problem was, to treat the brain just there, leave the rest of the brain alone, and intervene only when something bad was happening. And so it was developed to be able to place leads flexibly, depending on where the patient needed their leads and electrodes. So targeted the seizure focus or onset region, and then sense all of the time. And when a pattern that was of concern, meaning that it looked like a pattern that could lead into a seizure, was perceived by the device, detected, provide a stimulation and response. And we found, which was terrific, that we could detect very quickly, 100 milliseconds, that the amount of stimulation that was required in order to have the therapeutic effect is far below the perceptual threshold. And then we also, the engineers built in the capability of storing information. So really a continuous record of what the device does, where it detects, how stimulation is provided, and then actual recordings of the EEG directly from those electrodes in the brain. It's never been seen before. There is no data that exists of this type. And looking at all of this information through a secure web portal into a database, physicians can see what is actually happening and understand that when they make adjustments to the device, they can see what the effect is. So you have not only the patient coming and saying, I believe I had 3 seizures this month, you can actually see what's happening and share that with the patient. And this has really fed into us understanding how to apply. There's so many capabilities in the technology, but to understand how to apply them. So every patient teaches us something that we can apply to everybody else because of this data. So we began clinical trials in 2004.
Mhm.
We finally we did a feasibility or safety trial and then a randomized controlled trial. And those patients transitioned into long-term follow-up for additional safety and effectiveness data. And FDA approval occurred in 2013. So it wasn't fast. It was nine years.
Wow.
And it was really solid data, 324 patients, many, many thousands of patient years of experience.
Yeah.
As a condition of approval, which is very typical,
Sure.
FDA requested a post-approval study. And this study is very different than a retrospective chart review study because this study, the design was developed in consultation with FDA, really collaboration with FDA.
Yeah.
And there were discussions for 1 year about the data points that would need to be obtained, how the trial would need to be designed, and the protocol that specified visit frequency and outcomes, and all of the data that was collected was monitored by professional monitors who checked it against source. So it was a very rigorous study, and the intent of the study was to collect additional information on safety and effectiveness for patients who are treated according to the approved indication for use. So that is intractable epilepsy that begins from one or two foci or regions of the brain.
Mhm.
In when I say intractable, patients have failed at least 2 anti-seizure medications, 18 years of age or older. The study, the first patient was enrolled in 2015, and it was
Mhm.
conducted at 32 epilepsy centers with 324 patients implanted with our cranially implanted neurostimulator, the leads placed
Mhm.
within the brain according to the seizure focus, and then followed for 5 years. The primary effectiveness endpoint agreed upon with FDA was to be performed at 3 years. And one of their questions, which may be of interest to your audience, is
Mhm.
FDA really wanted to know whether there was a difference in the safety and the effectiveness based on the experience of the physician using
Mhm.
the technology, because it is complex in terms of its capabilities. And
Mhm.
their concern was that surgeons who had implanted the device before and neurologists who had programmed or treated the patient with the device before would have better outcomes than surgeons and epilepsy neurologists who were new to the game. And so half of the centers had a lot of experience from the clinical trials, and the other half did not have any. So at the American Academy of Neurology in April this year,
Mhm.
we presented the 3 year primary effectiveness endpoints and also the interim safety results.
Interesting. I want to go back because there's a lot to unpack there. You talked a lot, gave a lot of great information. Want to ask you about that journey to approval and when the device was finally approved. Was there, and we never really talk about this with any company that we interview or any executive, um, but was there a sense of elation? Was there a sense of relief? How was the feeling that day when you knew you had approval? I'm just
Well,
curious.
yeah, no, it was a long time from the complete from our submission to
About
approval. And
nine
of
years.
course,
Yeah.
during that time, we're a little company and this is our only product. So during that time, of course, we're burning money and it's a very intense time. And we had people who were still in the clinical trials, of course, that we needed to take care of in the long-term follow-up. So anyways, it was a couple of years. I'm a very stoic person who is used to dealing with high pressure situations. When we got at that time a fax, a one-page letter on a fax machine, somebody found that letter and looked at it and said, "I think this is important," and took it to our regulatory person who said, "Oh yes, this is important." And when I was told that we approved, my legs buckled. And I didn't hit my head, fortunately, but I ended up on the ground.
Oh, wow.
So
Wow.
it was, yeah, no, because so much effort by so many people, but I also knew how much we were helping people. And I knew how much those individuals had suffered. And so I was so afraid that we were not going to be able to to do provide the help that I was convinced in my heart we would be able to.
Yes. Interesting. Now, let's go into some of the highlights, some of the data from this post-approval study. Was there anything that really stood out? Anything that was super exciting?
Oh yeah, I jumped up and down when I found out about it. Um, the results were better faster than
Okay.
what we saw in our the trials that led to FDA approval. So these are people who had on average 20-year histories of drug-resistant epilepsy. They
Wow.
had six epileptic seizures a month on average, and they many of them had already gone through an unsuccessful epilepsy surgery, removing a part of the brain or ablating part of the brain.
Mhm.
Um, and so they'd been through an awful lot. And they don't at that point, after 20 years, you don't necessarily have an expectation that anything is going to work particularly well. I mean, certainly the patients don't. But there was a 62% reduction in the frequency of seizures, median reduction at 6 months. And then we saw what we see with our device, that things continue to get better with time. So that by 3 years is an 82% reduction, with 42% of patients having gone at least 6 months with no seizures at all. And this is after 20 years of seizures every month. So it was a really big deal. And what we, of course, the question we came to us is, well, why are people doing better? Are they not as sick? Because maybe that happens in a post-approval study.
Sure,
But we
sure.
looked at all the patient characteristics and they weren't any different. And what we have been able to figure out is that part of it is because we know how to apply the capabilities of the technology that have existed from the beginning,
Yeah.
but we know how to use it better. We're learning better. And partly, I want to give NeuroPace a lot of credit, which includes our CEOs, our board of
Yes.
directors, that there has been substantial investment in ongoing clinical discovery, clinical trials, but also developing advanced data analytic capabilities, machine and deep learning capabilities to use all of this data we have. The standard clinical trial data, like how old is the patient and why do they have epilepsy, but also all this brain data that we have. We have over 18 million samples of intracranial EEG
Wow.
and and tens of thousands of patient years of data.
Mhm.
And this is a huge resource. It has never existed before, and we keenly feel our responsibility to learn as much as possible. And from that, there have been changes in how we recommend
Mhm.
that stimulation be applied. And we also understand better how to personalize it
Sure.
because there are similarities in our group of patients, but every patient is their own self. And
Yes.
so there's no it would be naive to think that there's one way to treat everybody. But we can really take into consideration all kinds of variables for each individual to personalize how we provide the treatment. And do I think we can continue to do better? There's no doubt about it. And having this data and having it now available because it's open and we're able to analyze it now just adds so much more fuel to our efforts.
You're understanding the brain more, and you can
Yes.
launch and go out into a lot of different directions as time
Hmm.
goes on. But
Yeah.
now you have a quantitative measurement of just how the brain behaves, you know?
Yes, and
Yeah, yeah.
and which is, I mean, it's really astounding. And this is a very flexible technology. The leads can be placed
Yes.
wherever it is necessary to place them. You're getting all of this data, and there's a number of stimulation parameters that can be used.
Mhm.
And then looking at the data using AI and the other advanced techniques like Bayesian statistical analyses for
Mhm. Mhm.
optimization and all of this we are learning in real time, and it's the first time it's been done,
Yeah.
which is a lot of NeuroPace's story is doing something for the first time.
Yeah. You said the magic word. You said the magic letters AI, artificial
Yeah.
intelligence. That was my first thought when you were talking about all of this data that you'd collected. I was like, there's no way humanly possible that you can
No,
sift through it. But then you brought
right.
in the AI component. I said, yeah, yeah, AI
Yeah.
is everywhere. Yeah,
Well, and we were doing AI before AI was AI. And
yeah,
in fact, NeuroPace is a brain computer interface.
yes.
And it's one that's been available to since 2013, and over 77,000 patients are being treated with our brain computer interface. So no matter what others say, NeuroPace was first.
I
But
understand.
yeah, and when the initial data came in from the patients, and we're sitting in a room looking at it, a few of us, and saying, okay, let's try to figure this out, and let's remember these last 10 patients, and let's remember these last 25 patients, and then very quickly you go, we can't do this. We need some help. We need some people who understand at that time machine learning
Yes.
to bring it in, and then later um, uh, convolutional neural networks, and now we're using vision transformers.
Wow. Wow. Amazing, amazing how much everything has changed since what,
Oh,
2004?
yes, that's certainly the case.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Morrell, what would you say to anyone looking to get into the medical device industry? What advice would you give them? And I know you're a special case because you've come from academia, you've been in the hospitals. How would you talk about that transfer for someone who's interested in moving into the medtech space?
Well, I have the opportunity to do a lot of teaching and also spend time at other institutions as a visiting professor and working with their meeting with their engineering
Hmm.
students, generally the AI and biomedical engineering as well. So, first of all, there's an extraordinary field to be in. The
Hmm.
brain is so amazing.
Hmm.
And there are so many more tools available to us to understand neuroscience is where it's at right now,
Yes.
in many respects. And device technology is being applied in certainly in epilepsy and movement disorders, but also there's a lot of investigation going on in mood disorders, psychiatric disorders, and things like PTSD and a restoration of function. So there are a lot of problems to solve and a lot of opportunities. So I think as a biomedical engineer, that one big differentiation is, do I want to go to a big company where I'm going to get a lot of training, or and where maybe things are a little more secure,
Hmm.
or do I want to go to a little company where it's not so secure and I'm going to be able to figure it out as I go along? And I can see definite advantages to either way. And I know that many people actually end up getting experience in both big and little. At least many of the people I've worked with at NeuroPace, but we all have different personalities, where we might want to start. In the field of medicine, because there are many bright medical students, residents, fellows who talk to me about this, I say that you are going to be able to provide a different perspective on the user need. And so I really encourage everyone, take the effort to have an experience as a clinical physician treating patients.
Hmm.
Have some years of that under your belt, because that's going to make you so much more effective when you move into industry, because then you're going to bring something that others don't have. Engineers have their experience, and clinicians have their experience. And when you put those people together, that's, I believe, when the magic happens.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Dr. Morrell, thanks for coming on Let's Talk MedTech.
Thank you so much, Omar. It was a real delight.
That's it for this episode of Let's Talk MedTech. Thanks to our guests, Dr. Martha Marty, if you're into startups, Morrell, CMO of NeuroPace. If you like this content and want to see more of our coverage on NeuroPace and other medtech companies, please check us out on mddionline.com. That's mddionline.com. You can also find new episodes of Let's Talk MedTech there. Finally, make sure to rate, review, or subscribe to Let's Talk MedTech on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast.